Yeah, you can start now.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Cabinet today. And can I start by wishing you all a happy new year. It's got to be a better year than last year. Let's all hope, as we see vaccines being rolled out, and there is some light at the end of the tunnel. So we look forward to a more positive year, but we've got a little bit to go yet. Can I welcome any members of public who may be watching or will be watching in the future? I'm Peter Fox, leader of Monmouthshire County Council. I'll just invite my Cabinet colleagues, those who can get online, to introduce themselves. Can I start with Bob, please?
Good afternoon, Leader. Good afternoon, everyone. Bob Greenland, Enterprise and Land Use Planning.
Thank you. Phil?
Phil Murphy, Cabinet Member for Resources.
Jane, I'm not sure if you're going to get on. Jane Pratt? No, I don't think Jane will be able to get on. She's got troubles with her audio. Sarah?
Hi, Cabinet Member Sarah Jones, Cabinet Member for Social Justice and Community Development.
Penny?
Hi, Penny Jones, and I'm Cabinet Member for Health, Safeguarding and Social Services.
Richard?
Richard John, Cabinet Member for Children, Young People and Mon Life.
And Paul?
Paul Jordan, Cabinet Member for Governance and Law.
Thank you. And Jane, I know you're. I don't think you can. We can't hear you. So Jane Pratt is Cabinet Member for Infrastructure and Neighbourhood Services. Welcome, Jane. Can I also welcome today Joe Watkins, leader of the Liberal Group, and Councillor Kevin Williams, who's standing in for Dimitri Betruni, leader of the Labour Group. I'm not sure if we have Simon on with us today, but if we are, welcome to Simon Howarth, leader of the Independent Group. We're obviously joined by several officers as well, and welcome to you all. And if you were invited into the conversations, could you introduce yourselves at that point, please? Okay, so let's move through the agenda. So apologies for absence. Well, we haven't any from the Cabinet, but we have apologies from Councillor Dimitri Betruni. Any further, Nicola?
No, Leader, no more.
Okay, so declarations of interest. Anybody have an interest? Please declare verbally and then fill in the electronic pro forma. If you find one as we go through, you can bring it forward at that point. I'm not receiving anything at the moment, so I'll move straight on then to item 3, and that's to consider the following reports. And the first one is the Revenue and Capital Monitoring 20 to 21 Forecast Outturn Statement at month 7. Phil.
Thank you, Leader. And the purpose of this report is to provide members with a forecast of the revenue and capital outturn position for the current financial year, and to provide an update on the financial impact of COVID-19 on the Council. I should tell you at this stage, I've just had a message on my screen saying my internet connection is getting bad, so if I disappear, that's why, and I apologise for that. The recommendation is that Cabinet acknowledges a net revenue forecast deficit at month 7 of £6.43 million, which is an improvement of £995,000 from month 5, and it comprises a forecast of the non-COVID related deficit of £518,000, which will be managed in year, and that represents a reduction of £713,000 since month 5, of which £675,000 is a direct result of the decision to capitalise eligible expenditure and fund from capital receipts, using the flexible use of capital receipts directive. There's a forecast deficit of 5.91 million that's directly associated with the extraordinary financial pressures attached to COVID-19, and it's assumed that whilst government will continue to fund all associated and eligible income losses and cost pressures, and further indications are now that this is more and more of a certainty. It's looking a lot more settled from that point of view than it has been for quite some time. Indeed, the ongoing situation after March is starting to look more favourable as well. Since the budget forecasts have been produced for month 7, Cabinet is asked to recognise that Welsh Government has notified the authority of a further sum of 1.78 million to be made available to the authority, which is what I was referring to just now, to cover income losses for Q2 of the financial year, and that will in turn reduce the 5.91 million COVID-related forecast deficit to 4.13 million. So we keep our fingers crossed on that. The other recommendation is the Cabinet continue to make strong representations to Welsh Government to confirm full reimbursement of that 4.13 million COVID-related income losses and cost pressures. With the 5.19 thousand non-COVID related deficit, as I said, that's going to be managed through cost reduction and in taking immediate steps to curtail non-essential expenditure, recognising the risk that targeted and planned cost reductions will be challenging in the current operating environment, and given that the Council will always look to minimise impact on service delivery, that is going to be a struggle. However, even in taking the approach set out above, significant service pressures will need to be incorporated into the ongoing budget setting process for 2021-22 unless otherwise mitigated. To some extent, the provisional settlement will help a little in that regard, because we've had a much better settlement than we anticipated we were going to get. But more of that when I come to the budget in due course. Since entering 2020, the Council has faced significant and unprecedented challenges, notably the flood response and recovery resulting from storms Kara and Dennis in February, and then the subsequent COVID-19 pandemic, and the impact of the lockdown restrictions that were put into effect on the 23rd of March. Each of these draws significantly on the Council's resources, both in terms of capacity and finances, and continues to place an unprecedented strain on the Council. Non-COVID-19 pressures have in part resulted from the implementation of budget savings for 2021 being delayed. However, it's important to note that the forecast overspend of 6.43 million represents a worst case scenario in that it does not take any account of any further Welsh Government funding. Since the budget forecasts have been produced for month 7, Welsh Government has notified the authority of that 1.78 million, and that is going to make quite a difference to us. The Council tactically generated headroom of 1.8 million in its Council Fund balance as part of the outturn strategy for 1920, and this provides the Council with the flexibility to reserve this sum to respond to the financial pressures over the medium term. Table 1 in the report shows the significant pressure areas, and they as usual are hovering around social care and health, and that is mostly with regard to children's services. And when this goes out to the scrutiny committees, they'll be able to see a lot more detail on that. And also the enterprise direction department, which again has an awful lot of COVID related expenditure in it. So that's a quick run through the principal figures, Leader. It is going out to scrutiny now through the normal process, and that will give members the opportunity of having a real good look at it. So I'll stop at that.
Okay. Well, thanks, Phil. It's given us a great insight into the situation, a pleasing developing situation, but with some massive challenges still to come. and some big expectations. I do have confidence that Wales government will come forward. I have to, and with the money, and I, with other leaders across Wales, will be continuing to make those cases. So we look forward to a positive outcome. And as you mentioned, it's hopeful that there'll be a slightly better position for this next year's budget, but we'll get onto that when you present the budget in the March meeting. So can I perhaps, is Peter Davis there if he would like to add anything to what Phil might have said?
Yeah, Peter's with us.
Thank you, Leader. Nothing really to add. I think Phil has covered everything off. It's probably just to echo a couple of points. The one that you just made yourself, Leader. I guess a growing level of comfort that we will in fact get the funding that we very much need to cover COVID income loss and cost pressures, and that make up, a significant element of the deficit that is forecasted, and clearly a job of work still to be done by the council on the non-COVID related overspend pressures, and obviously to arrest that position and to break us back into at least a break-even position by the time we reach the end of the year. But beyond that, nothing further to add. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Peter, and thanks to you and all of the teams throughout the organisation, not only trying to manage and balance and a really challenging set of figures, because it's been really difficult for several years, but doing that in the context of everything else we've been fighting with. And it was remiss of me, actually, not at the beginning, to say, add a big thank you, not just to the accountancy staff, but all of the staff in the organisation who have done so much, certainly over Christmas. Many of our colleagues in the organisation worked all the way through Christmas every day, either fighting flooding or doing track and tracing or whatever element. And I just a massive thank you for that huge effort. Sorry, it was remiss of me not to mention it when I started. Cabinet colleagues, anything anybody like to add before I bring in Joe Watkins? I know he's got a couple of questions. No, there's the raise hand function in the chat bar, but nothing there. So Joe, if you'd like to, you've got a couple of points, and thank you for those in advance. And I'm sure Penny will want to talk to some of them, and Richard obviously as well. Would you like to? The floor's yours.
Thank you very much. In relation to the report that we've received, I noted with concern that there are still increasing pressures in the CYP budget, brought on by, as always, the increasing numbers of looked after children. Since joining the council, we had those numbers going up and up in every year, and it's been budgetary pressures every single year. So we've got a 1 million overspend predicted at the moment. My concern really is, can the cabinet member assure me that we will still to invest in early years prevention measures to help those families before those children get taken into care, because prevention is obviously so much better for the lives of those children. And then the second point is the continued reduction in school reserves and the number of schools which are in deficit, which is still going up now. And I'm concerned as to how we're going to expect the schools to balance their budgets without impacting on staffing, because we know that makes up by far the biggest element of school finance. So can we be given information as to how the schools are going to cut their costs without reducing staff? Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Really important questions, and ones we need to ask ourselves most years. So Richard's indicated he'd like to come in, so please come in, Richard.
Thank you. Well, thanks, Joe, for the question. And you're absolutely right. It is a challenge for schools, particularly as staffing is their biggest expense. But on school budgets, we have seen an improvement of £185,000 from the figures that were reported in month 5 of the financial year. So the collective school deficit currently stands at £422,000. 17 schools projected a deficit at the start of the financial year. We're now anticipating that 13. We've now got 13 schools who are projecting a deficit by the end of the financial year. That's by the end of March. Every school needs to consider all costs, both pay and non-pay, when they're considering their budgets. And while it's primarily the responsibility of the governing body to do this, we do work really closely and flexibly, really, with the schools to minimise the impact that their budgets have on staffing and standards. As you rightly say, invariably staff pay is the highest cost for any school, and therefore when schools are facing a deficit, it's the material budget, it's the one that schools will consider. In recent budget cycles, we've worked hard to meet all pay and pension increases and have delegated those to schools, ensuring that that doesn't create additional pressure on their budgets. All teaching staff are funded at the top of the pay scale, that's UPS 3. Now that allows schools to make savings where there's staff turnover. There can be challenges for schools when pupil numbers reduce or increase, and class structures may need to be considered or changed as a result. One of the challenges is the timing of funding calculations and the crossover with the academic year. In foundation phase, there's a set expectation about pupil and staff ratios, and the grant that's received to support this phase doesn't always meet the full cost. So in essence, funding from the school can end up subsidising those ratios. In addition, schools in a deficit can take out a loan from the local authority. We've been in discussions with a number of schools about taking this up, and that enables them to support an agreed recovery plan over more of an extended period of time, allowing them to make savings required in a way that mitigates impact, that perhaps mitigates the requirement or any requirement to reduce staffing. So it just helps them make that transition in a smoother way. And what we don't want to do is for schools to feel that they can't make investments that they feel are necessary in key areas to raise standards. So we're doing all we can to try and support schools, and as I say, it is an improving picture right now.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. And I mean, that's been the mantra of this organisation right from when I joined, that schools are a priority, and we do the best we can. When we increase more money to schools, we end up having to take it from somewhere else, but we've always tried to maintain the best position we can for our schools, even though it remains challenging. And Penny, I'm not sure if you'd like to come in if you wanted to reflect on the looked after children. I know it was additional to the question, but fundamental.
No, yes, please, Leader, certainly. Hi, Joe, and thank you very much for the question. It's really important, and it's a shock. Every year we look at the budget, and every year, the children and young people budget seems to increase. And as you've already pointed out, the number of children who are looked after has risen steadily over recent years, which is of great concern both nationally and regionally. It is a topic of conversation at every ministerial meeting to every local meeting. However, I'd just like to address specifically your question, which is and say that over a number of years, we've been on a journey of practice really in children's services, investing and allocating budget and resources into more preventative and therapeutic services, so both statutory and non-statutory, such as achieving change together and building stronger families. The early signs of benefit from investing in preventative services are being seen this financial year, in fact, with, despite the COVID-19 pandemic, a stabilisation of children who are looked after numbers. The service is now very much geared to respond to family vulnerability from a strengths-based perspective, with a focus on achieving the outcomes that matter for individual children and young people. It is set out both within the service's strategic intentions and within our practice values that our approach is supporting families through early help and prevention, whenever it is safe to do so. We've also invested in MIST, my support team, allowing us to support children that require more intervention to have access to such services closer to their community, which is so important. In other words, they're not sent far out of county, to minimise disruption and at the same time achieve the best possible outcomes for the child. The stabilised children who are looked after figures look positive now, but does not mean it will remain the case, of course, in the future. Now more than ever, we have to remain focused on identifying and responding to need. Vulnerability and risk. The earlier the better, but that does not mean that in every situation we can avoid taking children into care. Protection and safeguarding remain our core statutory duty. Okay, Joe, thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, Penny, and thank you, Joe, for the question. Obviously, this is a forecast position. We've got a few months to go, and things will and no doubt will no doubt change. I'm sure. Let's hope positively. Okay, there's nobody else in the chat bar with a raised hand, so I'm going to take the recommendation. Phil worked through the recommendations earlier. Oh, Richard, are you looking to come back in?
Sorry, I wasn't quick enough on the chat bar. It's appearing on a different screen on my laptop for some reason. I just wanted to make a couple of general points on Phil's report. Really, it would be churlish not to welcome the above average percentage increase we've had in our settlement this year, but we're not quite in a position to put up the bunting yet, are we? It's we're still the worst funded council in the country. We've still got the lowest settlement of per head of the 22 councils, and that is really frustrating when you think that for every £1,000 we receive per resident in Monmouthshire, there are neighbouring local authorities that get about £1,700. That gap's been widening year on year, and while the gap hasn't widened, that gap hasn't got any wider this year. That still means tens of millions of pounds we're effectively missing out on in terms of the improved services we could offer to residents. So that is really frustrating, and I hope Welsh Government will do more in the coming years to narrow that gap, or perhaps even review the formula altogether, because it doesn't seem a very clear or transparent process, although I appreciate we have seemed to have benefited from it a little bit this year. And also, I just want to commend the work of officers in recent months in supporting our communities through the pandemic, which I think has been absolutely first class. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Yeah, you make a strong point. Points which will be reiterated at the full council when we set the budget. But you're quite right. A high percentage of nothing still gives you nothing. So with just over £1,000 per capita, even a 3.9% increase is only going to give you about 39 quid a person increase. If you apply that 3.9% to someone on £1,700, obviously they're going to get nearer £70. And compound that onto what they already get, obviously they're significantly more advantaged. So yeah, we are still right at the bottom of the heap of the 22nd lowest. Well, we are the lowest funded authority in Wales, even though we've got a slightly better settlement than we had last year. So there's plenty to do, and the funding formula is the fundamental point, which we've all argued about, and I hope in due course that there is an effort to really look at that, to make sure that all authorities in Wales, whatever their nature, are sustainable for the future, because currently the current system doesn't look like it will enable some authorities to be sustainable. So there has to be a look at this, a serious look at it. And I'm sure we'll have further conversations on this as we move through to the budget setting process. So thanks again, Richard. Thank you, Phil, and officers. I'll take us to the recommendations. Phil worked through them earlier, so I'm going to take them on block, and they range from 2.1 right the way through to 2.8. I won't read all those out again because they've been we've been taken through those. So the voting option is in your chat bar now. If you could vote, please. And We've got 7. It is carried. I'm conscious that a couple of members are having problems with connectivity, so we might not get the full 8 in there, but it's carried. So thank you, everybody. Okay, let's move on to the next item today, and that is the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act 2000. Paul Jordan.
Thank you, Leader. Monmouthshire County Council is legally permitted to carry out a range of activities as part of its duties that fall under the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act 2000. While such activity is rare, it is a requirement of the Council to have an up-to-date policy that governs it, and the Council is also subjected to inspections by the Investigatory Powers Commissioner's Office periodically. Cabinet is the appropriate body to approve the policy and also to receive the outcome of any inspection. Audit Committee will also receive a report from the Senior Responsible Officer annually. The policy is at Appendix 1 and was considered at inspection with the following comment in the report by the Right Honourable Sir Brian Leveson. I'll read that as follows. I'm aware that the revised RIPA policy is very soon to be presented to the Council Cabinet for approval, and that my inspectors, having reviewed the document, are satisfied that it is comprehensive in detail and addresses the key areas of RIPA. They are content that it will be meaningful to staff and should serve to ensure your authority remains compliant with the legislation and codes of practice. The inspection letter is at Appendix 2, as it is classified official sensitive by IPCO. It has not been published with this report, but is available for all members. The inspection discharged all previously made formal recommendations and made no further such recommendations. It also identified elements of good practice. Well, Leader, I'll take you to the recommendations, and those are that Cabinet is requested to approve the Monmouthshire County Council RIPA policy, and then Cabinet is requested to note the recent IPCO inspection report. Thank you, Leader.
Okay. Thank you, Paul.
Matt Gatehouse, Matt Phillips is available if you've got any.
He's come on screen on cue, so welcome, Matt. Please, would you like to reflect further on it?
Yeah, thanks, Leader. So Matt Phillips, Head of Law Monitoring Officer, and I'm the Senior Responsible Officer for RIPA. I think the only thing to point out, I mean, it's a policy with lots of legislative backdrop to it and what have you. It's a quite chunky piece of legislation that sits behind this, but actually, I just wanted to make the point that it's not. While it's right that we've got a kind of robust system and framework in place, it's not actually a power that we've drawn on, certainly in the 2.5 years I've been here, and not for a period of time before that. You know, the way that we prefer to engage with people, you know, be it public protection trading standards, is just that, it's engage with people rather than relying on this legislation. So it's a robust framework there, but it's not necessarily a go-to tool that we would draw on all that often.
Okay, well, thank you, Matt. So I'm not sure if any members, there's no hands gone up in the chat bar. I'm conscious that colleagues are having some difficulties at home with getting in here. So, but there's nobody's indicated they want to speak. So it's pretty well straightforward. Let's welcome that report. So the recommendations then are at 2.1, Cabinet is requested to approve the MCC RIPA policy, and 2.2, the Cabinet is requested to note the recent IPCO inspection report. And we wait for the voting function to come up, and then when it does, we can go ahead and vote. There we go, it's coming up now. Part of it has come up on my screen. There we go. Things are running a little slower today by the looks of it with the internet. Okay, please vote now if you can.
Right. Good.
Okay, that's 100%. So everybody managed to vote that time. So thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Matt. Okay, on to the next report, and that is the Gypsy and Traveller Accommodation Assessment, and that's Councillor Bob Greenland.
Thank you, Leader. We're being asked today to approve the Gypsy and Traveller Accommodation Assessment. Now, this is a requirement on MCC, and we have a need to do this every 5 years. But this assessment is also useful as we go on and we develop the replacement development plan. But the development plan will take us to 2033. So in undertaking research for this assessment, we have also looked forward to that year of 2033. Opinion Research have undertaken surveys amongst the Gypsy and the Traveller community, and the results of these surveys have guided this assessment, and you will find those in paragraphs 321 and 322. That shows the details of the assessment, and officers will now continue to work to meet these requirements as we move forward. This report, this assessment, has been considered by a select committee steering group, and they have commented that as we move forward, all departments of the council that could have an input into this, so it's not just planning and housing, but it's things like environmental health and licensing, that they should also be involved in that preparation, and that will be done as a matter of course. We have with us this afternoon, I think, yes we do, Ian Bakewell, our housing manager, and also Stephen Griffiths, who is the author of this report. So if members have any questions of them, they are available here with us today. Thank you, Leader.
Yeah, thank you, Bob, and thanks for the way this has been taken forward and the work that Steve and Ian will have done on this, and the working group. And it's great that it's been a fully inclusive, or will be fully inclusive process. I'm not sure if either Ian or Steve want to add anything at this point.
Steve Griffith speaking. The Strategy and Policy Officer at Housing and Communities. No, I think that nothing to add really to Councillor Greenwood's submission.
Okay, well, thanks, Steve. Thanks for the work you have done on this, and for gathering all the information that we have here. Cabinet colleagues, anybody wishing to speak? Raise your hand now. No. Was there anything for Ian? Did you need to? Would you like to say anything further?
No, thank you, Leader. Councillor Greenland summed everything up.
Okay, well, thank you, everyone. Right, well, we warmly welcome the assessment, and we thank everybody for their part in bringing this together. Absolutely fundamental that we have this in place. So the recommendations that we have before us then is that the Cabinet adopts the Gypsy, Traveller and Show Persons Accommodation Assessment, GTAA 2021 to 2026, and submit it to Welsh Government. So the voting option is in your chat bar. Okay. Well, we've certainly got 7. I think we might have some. Oh no, we've got full house 8. So great. Thank you very much there. And thank you once again to officers who presented reports today. That brings us to the end of a relatively short agenda, but very important one. I think we can move to close the meeting, and we look forward to seeing you all again at the probably the full council is the next time we'll come together next week. So thank you all.
Thank you, Chair.
Can you just stay on the line a minute, Pete?